Welcome to What the Health, an independent approach to your health span. Have you noticed how our healthcare system may not have your best interest in mind? Join Dr. Eckel in this fun and sometimes disturbing exploration of the state of healthcare and what it means for you. Now, here's your host, Dr. Eckel.
Hey everybody, welcome back to What the Health. I'm Dr. Greg Eckel.
Dr. Jonathan Nadal.
And we are talking mitochondria, NAD, and caloric restrictions as the fountains of youth. We're going to continue in on our longevity discussion here. And we have the little darlings of longevity, Doc. We've got the mitochondria. Will you tell our listeners and viewers what are we talking about here?
Yeah, so if anyone remembers biology from way back when, every cell has the powerhouse of the cell, the little engine deep in there, and it's the mitochondria. It's an organelle. It's like a little mini cell within our cell, and it very closely resembles ancient bacteria that may have been hanging out with us, and it seems like both parties agreed that maybe we can work together. Because thankfully, yeah. And so so much cellular respiration and energy and all, the Krebs cycle, all these important biochemical processes that are happening in the cell are fueled very much in part by what's going on in the mitochondria constantly and quickly. And there's a lot of demands that go into that, which is a lot of what we're going to explore.
Yeah, usually when we mention ninth grade science class, there's a lot of glazing over of eyes and people disappear on us. So come back from that. And the mitochondria are like the kidney bean shaped organelles. And, Dr. Nadal mentioned it as these energy factories, which is the darling of Dr. David Sinclair out of Harvard now. He wrote a book called Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We May Not Have to. They're really tracking it down into molecules that feed our mitochondria. The mitochondria also have this amazing ability, receptors for light. So red light therapies feed our mitochondria. But why are these so important? We have a ton of mitochondria in the heart tissue. Because the way the heart beats, it's using a lot of energy. So it needs these energy factories. The brain also has a significant amount of mitochondria. Every cell of our body has mitochondria, these energy factories. So this component, what are we talking about? Energy, the currency of the body is called ATP. This is adenosine triphosphate, ATP. Oxygen, vitamin, minerals go into the mitochondria, go down through this little chain of command, and out comes the ATP, which is the energy, the fuel for life of what the body uses. These mitochondria are cell signaling units. So they work within, apoptosis, or some people will say apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. So some people are implicating mitochondrial toxicity or mitochondria dysfunction with cancers, which little known fun fact there. So you can share that around the dinner table tonight. But the ATP, this currency that our body uses, the mitochondria are linked with aging. So we are talking about longevity, and why I wanted to really highlight these kidney bean shaped organelles is it really is the basis of life there. Some say in aging, when you have mitochondrial dysfunction, you then, when you use them all up, then you die, right? So when they become so dysfunctional, lots of things will impact their health, which we're going to get into and unpack today. But in particular, we know there are these free radicals that can come along and impact the health of the mitochondria, right? So that one of the darlings right now is NAD. But I first want to talk about what are the things that can impact mitochondrial health.
Yeah, good. I mean, so when we think of, so even things like the byproducts of energy production, as a metaphor, just to keep it kind of, if we think of cars, right? When there's when that fuel, that gasoline is coming out, there's combustion, there's smoke, right? So any energetic or metabolic process is going to have some byproduct. So in this way, along that electron transport chain, which is kind of what's happening in the mitochondria, there's things like reactive oxygen species, right? That's just a byproduct of energy production, right? So these are really charged particles. Now, when you have these charged particles kind of floating around, it could damage DNA, fats, and proteins, and all these other macromolecules that we need in good shape to keep the engine running, right? So if the damage is caused by the ROS, eventually even the functional parts of the mitochondria could become damaged. Thankfully, our body and cells have repair mechanisms, but of course, as we age and if there's enough damage, we can't repair it as easily. So that's where there's some tools and some biohacks where we can make sure that we support our mitochondria in clearing some of these things. Right?
And this is really, what you're seeing a lot of anti-aging, functional medicine, integrative physicians talk about. You'll see a lot of people talking about IV NAD and or things to boost your NAD. And this is really coming out of Sinclair's lab out of Harvard. But there are things, so why the mitochondria are important. Again, energy factories. Our bodies run on energy. And there are these free radicals or reactive oxidative species like the fog, the congestion from the carburetor that's not working in the car. I like that you use the car analogy, Doc. And having, free antioxidants come through and clear that out to make the job of our energy factories more efficient. There are lifestyle things that we can do: intermittent fasting, the ketogenic diet, exercise was one of my favorites, cold exposure. And then there's a whole litany of supplements that we're going to go through. But I want to, let's stress on the foundational stuff and with our lifestyle changes, because I think everybody's looking for that magic purple pill or magic NAD pill. Mm-hmm. And some of those exist, but ultimately, one of my favorite quotes in the longevity realm is, you're not going to be able to supplement your way out of a bag of potato chips. So I'm sorry that you just aren't going to be able to do it. So there is this component of the intermittent fasting, or we could call it time-restricted eating, which is a little bit more apropos. Maybe go through a couple of the different scenarios that we recommend in the clinic for folks around that. And then we'll talk specifically around caloric restriction a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, great. And you know what? It's not what I love about it, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, right? But even just the idea of time-restricted eating, there's so many different formulas out there. I think you and I like to keep it simple, at least initially. It doesn't have to be, some will go for one day throughout the week where they don't eat, a whole 24-hour fast. And that could be a nightmare for some people. So rather than just flip the switch and start that way, even starting with 18 and then 6, where you have a certain amount of time where you're not eating, even if you want to start with 14 or 12 hours of not eating, and little by little just shorten that window of when you're getting calories in your body. There's a lot of things going on. Not only are you telling all of your cells to help mobilize whatever energy stores are there, but simultaneously, because of that, it's going to have to burn through fat. But it takes about 16 to 18 hours for even the gastromotility complex to actually start slowing down and stopping. So your gut doesn't even stop. It doesn't even get to hit the pause button until you hit that much time. And guess what? Not just your brain and body, but your gut could really use a pause button every now and then. So there's a lot of benefits to this intermittent fasting. And I think it's more akin to how our bodies have been used to eating for the greater part of human history, right?
Yeah, you look at any species that has a longevity component built in, they'll go through these times of famine. And if we build that into, like you were saying, we can get food 24/7 now. And the food choices that we have really lead to inflammation or inflammation aging, inflammaging. And so taking that break, we'll counsel on a 16-8. So eating, the clock starts for 8 hours, or take one day off a week. That could be the Sunday. Or I had a long time played around with from Sunday at 2 p.m. to Monday at 2 p.m. That seemed to be pretty doable for me, with skipping Sunday dinner and Monday breakfast, having a late lunch. So, these are ways to like bring it in. And why we don't hear a lot of people educating around the intermittent fasting is there's nothing to buy. In fact, you're consuming less, right? And it's it's definitely within everybody's means to not eat as frequently. In fact, it saves you money on your grocery bill every week. So it is, that's a hard hitting, big needle mover technique. And really should be considered incorporated into everybody's lifestyle, because of that component Dr. Nadal mentioned around giving your bowels a break to clean the senescent cells, which are kind of zombie cells that don't turn off. They just kind of go into their own zombie land and start wreaking havoc on our systems. There's a component, what happens is when you stop eating all of the time, we shift our energy reserves from glucose, which is coming from carbohydrates, into ketones, which is a great fuel for our brains, or a ketogenic diet. So or keto adaptive dieting. A lot of folks are advocating ketogenic diet for weight loss and kind of the next best thing across the board. I would say maybe if you have Native Alaskan descent, or you have ancestry north of the Arctic Circle, that may be a great viable diet long term. Because what is it? It's a bunch of fat and protein. There's no simple carbohydrates. In fact, very low carb to no carbohydrates in that diet. But it's a hard diet to pull off. What have you seen clinically with folks on a ketogenic diet as far as pitfalls or cautions there?
Yeah, it's similar, and I like the way that you brought that up, because it's not everybody that can withstand eating that much fat and protein. Some more research has been done. It's okay to have that much protein. Really, some people were worried that liver, kidney damage with that much protein. That's not too big of a deal, but with the fat, it becomes troublesome if people, let's say they don't have a gallbladder, or let's say they have hepatobiliary issues, along with some compromised kidneys. Like, it's not for everybody. I know that it has been very beneficial, especially with a lot of the neurodegenerative population that we work with. It can be very good. Once they pass into that zone of ketosis, there is a certain levity and focus that comes with it. Even with the intermittent fasting, just to bring that up, some people think, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to think or concentrate, but you'd be surprised. Once you get used to being in that zone, there's actually more clarity. The hardest part about keto is the sustainability. I've even on the longevity front with our younger patients who are otherwise really healthy and just trying to gain a competitive edge and maybe lose a few pounds, they will. And then if they drop off the keto in a couple of months, that just shifting the body back into that more glucose burning carb balance, I think it can become kind of a yo-yo dieting thing.
Yeah.
And it's not healthy. So similar to the best exercise is the one that you're going to do. The best diet or food program, whatever you want to call it, is going to be one that you can actually stick to. So, I know Bredesen, I spoke about that earlier today a little bit. He has more the keto flex, where some of the numbers of ketosis are a little bit more flexible, not as rigid, right? And like you mentioned, being in ketosis or measuring ketones in your urine or otherwise, it's just measuring that level of how successfully you're in that zone, because that's more the fat burning zone. So overall, it does work for some patients, and we do see some good clinical outcomes, but the bigger conversation is to make sure that it's sustainable, because short wins are fun, but we want to make sure that it's long lasting and figure out how to achieve that for sure.
Yeah. The other component that can aid the mitochondria is exercise. Now, you've heard this one. This is a non-sexy recommendation, right? It's like we want the new flashy thing, but good old time aerobic exercise, 20 minutes a day is really a great way to go here as a longevity play. But in specifics here for our mitochondria and our health of our mitochondria, you want to be in kind of a moderate zone of heart rate, 120 to 139 for most of us listening to this podcast or viewing. That would be the zone 2 moderate intense level. You can get there with, we all wear these devices, the Oura Ring or the Fitbit or the Apple Watch. So, really measuring that target outcome, it is important, and that works on circulation and blood flow, what travels in the blood, the healing properties of the body. Oxygen, vitamin, minerals go in, carbon dioxide, waste products come out. And so NAD is in there, the oxygen that feeds the mitochondria to produce the ATP, all of your nutrients, etc., are in the circulation. So exercise increases your circulation. It increases BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It will open the vasculature of the heart. So if you have any microscopic changes that are the precursors to cardiovascular illness, it will reverse that by doing that type of exercise. And I will tell you, I skewed over to more weightlifting. As I've gotten into my 50s, I want to make sure I'm maintaining muscle tone. And I did it at the detriment of my cardiovascular system. And so I recently had a VO2 max test done that picked up some microscopic changes, which is the precursor to macroscopic changes for cardiovascular disease, which is, arteriosclerosis and cardiovascular disease, the number one killer on the planet at this point. So we really are advocating on foundational work, and we're talking about mitochondria and longevity, is exercise.
Absolutely. Great. And hey, it's also more efficient. For some people, being in the gym for an hour is great and amazing, and then showering and getting out and eating something. But guess what? If you can squeeze a 20-minute exercise, that's going to accomplish as much, if not more, in the mitochondrial and heart rate variability front. Why not?
Yeah.
So, absolutely.
Love it. What else do we have to help support lifestyle-wise for mitochondria?
So cold exposure, it's something that's near and dear to us. I mean, even back in studying, with naturopathic medicine, I remember first experimenting, turning the shower absolutely cold for 30 seconds and wondering, why on earth would I do this to myself? Letting it go over your neck, over the kidneys. But, eventually you get kind of hooked on it, and it feels good, especially if you're showering in the morning. Especially if it's cold out and you do that, because when you get out of that, you're warm because it increases circulation. So it's phenomenal at increasing mitochondrial health. And if you notice the common theme from the high intensity interval training, even to the intermittent fasting, to the cold exposure, it's really just putting the body through a physiological seesaw in a healthy way. And it's just increasing the adaptivity of the body. And that's where the mitochondria shine. Because it's really the ability to rev between gears, if we're going to keep with that engine metaphor, is where the mitochondria come into play, right?
Love it. Yeah. So those are just off the cuff as far as lifestyle stuff that you can implement today to really benefit your energy, your battery of your body. Those are some lifestyle stuff. Now, I know everybody wants to get to, well, what can I take? We're going to share that with you now. And some of the big ones. So when we talk about mitochondria, the biggest one that comes up is NAD. And that is, it's a mouthful, but it is a major darling of natural medicine. Now, NAD has been studied, I've known about it for over 20 years using IVs in addiction care, where somebody would come in for high dose NAD IV drips. You'd run it 6 to 7 days a week, and it would help people come off of heroin, off of methamphetamines, off of alcohol, off of tobacco. So it's an amazing one. And that was really my use of it. Now, it's becoming the darling in the biohacking world and in longevity. because of the research coming out of Dr. David Sinclair's lab there, and they're really showing life extension in mice with taking not straight up NAD, because that one, if you just take it orally, it gets broken down in your digestive tract, but taking niacinamide, which is a B vitamin. It's a precursor to NAD. There's NR, nicotinamide riboside, pardon me. That's a precursor. But then the biggest one that, again, Dr. Sinclair is noticing is NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, right? Again, just rolls off the tongue. But NMN has the best research as far as viability to measure actual NAD in the body. So a lot of claims with those other ones, but the big one is the NMN.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it is a direct precursor to the NAD, right? So you go from the nicotinamide mononucleotide to the adenosine dinucleotide, like it's a pretty direct mechanism. And similar to the effects that you get from that high dose NAD, if you take a little too much NMN, you feel kind of the flushing, maybe the lightheadedness. So for those that are open to experimenting, definitely starting with lower doses, because it is with the NMN, it is better mostly on an empty stomach in the morning. I think even starting with 100 milligrams or 200 milligrams and seeing how you feel with it. I think Sinclair talks about taking up to 500 milligrams and resveratrol in the morning with his coffee, which sounds phenomenal. I'm working my way up there, but it's a little different for everybody. But I feel like within a few days, you could feel there is a certain cognitive enhancement and clarity that comes with it, which is interesting. It's like the lights are kind of focused a little differently. So it is an interesting one, and it's not too hard to find.
The other thing I want to cover on NAD levels just in our bodies, they do decrease dramatically between 40 and 60 years old. So it has been linked to our aging process. Some speculate and have measured a 50% decline of NAD levels between 40 and 60 years old. So at age 50, we have 50% less NAD than we were at 20 years old. By age 80, NAD levels drop 90%, set the stage for cellular senescence. Again, what the intermittent fasting and taking a break from eating helps clear those senescent cells. Also, the decrease in NAD also is working there. And I think that the other component to mention there is around the NMN as one of the best precursors. It really does mimic what NAD does in the body. In fact, it breaks down into NAD. And it is around cell signaling and the sirtuins in the body. There's a couple other substances and supplements that we wanted to mention in this portion before we get into a dietary discussion. And this really goes to the reactive oxidative species, or those free radicals again. We have resveratrol. Again, that came out of Sinclair's lab. That's the active constituent in red wine. Apigenin. Now, this is coming from fruits and vegetables. It prevents the breakdown of NAD, and it increases NAD and the sirtuins, the SIRT1 gene, which is really around sirtuin activation, which is an anti-aging play again. Any other ones worth mentioning there that you want to throw in?
Those are the main ones, and just knowing where resveratrol can come from, like even polygonum and certain herbs that we work with, Western med and Chinese medicine are rich in resveratrol as well. Those are good. I mean, there's also berberine is also pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of nature's version of just a healthy version of metformin, just helping to prevent mitochondrial dysfunction overall, and in many ways helping to increase the SIRT1 levels. So if mitochondria need to regenerate, it is beneficial in supporting it.
And I want to put a big asterisk next to that, because I think that, metformin has become a darling in the anti-aging or age reversal or longevity communities. Mm-hmm. And, metformin is a medication for diabetes. They are showing all-cause mortality going down with metformin use, lower risks of cancers. There are some side effects with metformin long-term use, though. And why I like the natural product of berberine for this very reason is very low, much lower side effect profile. In fact, none that I know of with the berberine as compared to metformin. Metformin can create nausea, loose stool. There's some immediate side effects that kind of go away with use. But then long-term wise, I've seen it really accelerate the use and breakdown of the pancreas in folks with diabetes. Now, you might say, well, was it the medication or was it the disease process? I think both is the answer there. However, over the last 22 years of practice, I have seen the metformin accelerate the breakdown and degradation of the pancreas. So where somebody becomes more insulin dependent, and which has its own risks as well for cardiovascular health, et cetera. So just an asterisk, just remember berberine. You heard us maybe not here first, but we're just emphasizing it for you in the overall schematic on a longevity play for us. Now, okay, so we talked about some supplementation. We talked about lifestyle stuff. What does environment have to do with this? When we're talking about mitochondria, energy production, the battery of the body, that's kind of how this topic came to be, the reason d'etre of the reason of being. How important is toxicity with mitochondrial health?
Yeah, I mean, we can throw all the fasting and food and supplements we want, but if it's, I mean, there's from parasites to different pathogens, heavy metals, medications, oxidative stress, all that is just white noise in our body. And it's causing traffic on the bridge, it's clouding up the river. I mean, things can't move in and out of the cells if all of these things are in our bodies. So this is more the first order of operation, right? Like figuring out what is interfering, what are the obstacles to cure, and let's clear them up and fix them, and then introduce. I mean, we could introduce them simultaneously, but it's imperative to actually make sure that these things are cleared up because they will get in the way.
Yeah, and they're basically all on creating those reactive oxidative species, that congestion from the car that we had started out talking about. And chelation, sauna therapies can be very beneficial here. Chelation is pulling out heavy metals. You might be thinking, well, where are the metals coming from? It's like we are living in a bunch of metals in our environment. The top four that we see in our practice when we're looking at this, we look at metal burden for everyone with neurocognition issues or neurodegeneration. So Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's disease, along these lines. We find cadmium, mercury, arsenic, and lead. Top four burdens in the body that we're seeing in our practice. Now, that's not everybody, so I'm not going to make that universal component, but those are the top four that we've really been seeing. Have you seen any other ones lately, Doc? We just lost Dr. Nadal. We'll see if we can get him back on here. So I'll pose him that question when he comes back on. I don't think that NAD is a fad. I think that, I put that in the show notes of looking at it. Welcome back, Dr. Nadal.
Thank you. I looked at the screen the wrong way and the internet left.
It didn't like it. So one of the things I asked is if you had seen any other metals that are they trending right now as far as what you're seeing for any assays in the heavy metal testing?
Oh, so I imagine you started talking about metals then. Yeah, I wasn't even there for that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, well, some of the heavy hitters, lead, mercury, those are definitely the most common. But, we see some fluctuations in aluminum. Even some patients, depending if they've had a lot of imaging studies like gadolinium and things like that, But I would say lead and mercury are definitely the more common hitters. I don't know if you
Yeah.
mentioned those already.
I did those two, and then cadmium and arsenic would be the next two down the line. Right. So the top four. I was curious. The gadolinium. I remember we had reviewed a few cases with that recently of like, where in the world is this coming up? Of like, oh yes, they've had multiple contrast dyes on imaging. The half-life of that stuff is really a long time. So having that in the body. Then, we are just, I was basically talking about in the show notes, I put, for my, controversial statement, is NAD a fad? What do you think?
I mean, sure. But what's wrong with fads? I mean, if it translates
I said it wasn't. I said, no, it's not a fad.
It's science.
It's the darling right now. Like, so over, again, 2 decades of practice, you see certain flavors of the month come up, right? So now this one's hot, and then, next month or next year, it's this supplement. This one, I think that, again, because of Dr. Sinclair's work and his pull and influence in molding the discussion, this one's not going away. And, unless the FDA outlaws it for some reason, I don't know why they would. It's been on the market for a while and it's safe and effective. But I don't think it's a fad. I think certain people use it fad-like, meaning it's like their one-trick pony to solve everything, right? If you ever get an IV of NAD, one of the things Joe Mercola taught me was, basically, we were studying NAD with him for a bit. And really what it came down to was weightlifting will increase your body's NAD levels better than really any supplement can. So there are a lot of people that won't do weightlifting. I already mentioned the cardiovascular component. However, so it's nice to have some supplements to help support. But I don't want people to get reliant on the supplementation, because ultimately our bodies are miraculous. So I always operate from that premise, and they are the best chemistry. This is the living laboratory, and really given the right information, removing these obstacles to cure, like we just talked about, environmental toxicity ruining our mitochondria, clearing that stuff up, getting your foundational work in, your body is really self-sufficient. To a point, right? Because we've got some multivitamin mineral deficiencies out in the soil, etc. But I guess my long-winded answer, Dr. Nadal, is I'm saying it's not a fad, but I think we need to really be cognizant of where does it sit at the table. This for me is not a driver. Occasionally I'll recommend people do a series of IVs if they're totally depleted or showing major mitochondrial dysfunction. Then we look at oral supplementation, but ultimately it's while we're getting the lifestyle stuff up and running.
Absolutely. And just to shine some light between these very informed opinions for fun, I think what's going to continue happening, so fine, the NMN to the NAD, fasting, exercise, genetic changes. I feel like even though the ideas around the NAD, they're 5-10 years before, they'll stick around for, I think it's going to be an amazing building block so that we get more information and knowledge on what's impacting that and all the other downstream effects that are going on in our cells. So I feel like there may be more that comes about around it and from it. So in that way, kind of, it's like a film reel where it's like a very strong intro and motif, and then more is built off of it. So fad in that sense, but definitely something that needs to stay as a key part of the picture, not through supplementation, but through supplementation and lifestyle and how to augment it for sure, right?
Yeah, yep. I love it. There is real science there, right?
There is, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, we do a deep dive into mitochondria, things to support mitochondria. Then I have backed out on the macro level. Where does diet play a role here when we're talking about longevity? We went microscopic into mitochondria, right? Kidney bean shaped organelle. Now we're going to come back to macroscopic at the high level view. where's diet role in all of this? Are there top diets that we recommend that have great research, things like this?
Yeah, I think to go briefly back to keto inspired diets, if you see some of the pyramids that were rebuilt, you know, at the bottom of the standard American diet, you have all these beautiful cereals, grains, and breads and all that stuff in the bottom. That's removed. And it's fasting in the bottom as the base, right? And then you get your protein and vegetables and fats. And then if you weave in some fun Mediterranean diet things, they throw in a little person dancing on the side, you know, and community, because that's equally important. So it's just kind of flipping the script on how we think about food and what our relationship is with it, right? Because every culture has their kind of their standards, you know, what's in the pantry, like what they're going to eat on the day to day, but all of it can be enhanced in certain ways to optimize health. So yeah, just to start with that, you know, just forget that.
I love that new pyramid. We definitely need to get that out on our social media. We got to just kind of chicken scratch it together, get it over to our team to create that graphic. That's lovely. All right. Well, so that's like kind of the new pyramid for longevity. What not to eat. And I don't like, you know, obviously we started with like the right way to eat, but let's talk about the SAD diet. You called it the standard American diet. We love to call it affectionately the SAD diet. It leads to chronic inflammation aging. What is it? Why is it affecting us the way it is? What's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, where to begin, right? So thinking about ultra processed foods and all of the just the plastics and everything that's in it, which is, I mean, it's literally interfering with your genes, and it's the ultra processed foods that should be a given. I know in a pinch, if there needs to be canned or microwavable food, sure, for survival, but within reason, right? The bigger culprits, I think, added sugar, fat, and sodium. And just to put into perspective, I mean, the average amount of sodium that we need, what is it, like less than a teaspoon or some ridiculous amount? And yet people will sit there and pile it on their food that maybe was prepackaged and already has 50% of their daily sodium. That's their lunch. And then maybe they're drinking something or a bag of something that already, so that's it. They've had enough sodium for the week in one meal, right? So we know their heart is suffering for that. Talk about getting a workout. Their heart is sweating in that meal, you know? And then added sugar, the same thing. You affectionately call it the white death or the white devil, right? I mean,
that's right.
Sugar comes in many forms. I even have to look twice at labels for even salsa because there's added sugar in some of these things. It's ridiculous. It's in everything, right?
It's interesting, you know, why I always am puzzled as to how our farming policies have been skewed to ill health. Like, you know, we could change this from on high of, you know, we want to create a regenerative culture, right? We could get into supporting regenerative medicine, regenerative soil practices to trap carbon from the atmosphere and solve global warming by just doing that. And then you look at, well, could we subsidize farmers to actually grow food that would be beneficial for our health, right? Beneficial for our health, beneficial for the planet. It's kind of a win-win-win scenario. You know, rather than, you know, people dictating lifestyle or, you know, what you can and can't eat. I think if we just kind of subsidized in the right way, it would be really easy for people to get behind this. But now it's like, I hear, you know, oh, I can't eat organic, or I don't want to change my diet. I mean, I just spoke with an 80-year-old today with a Parkinson's diagnosis and chronic pain. And it came out that he had a sugar tooth. Well, I also have a sweet tooth. For viewers of the podcast, if you've read the book, you know I am self-disclosed sugar addict. But I have it under control, because if I don't, I mean, that's why I call it the white death. But he was like, look, I'm 80 years old. I don't want to give up sugar. And I said, well, we could just stop talking now, because I said, if you're fine the way that you're feeling, then by all means, don't change a damn thing. And he quickly backpedaled and said, well, I'm here, aren't I? I said, yes, but I've learned long ago, I'm not pushing or pulling you through anything. Like, that's just a system for failure. Like, you have to be fully invested and on board. That's who we want to work with, folks. Like, we want people that know they want the information to make up their own minds in informed choice. We're not going to shame, blame, and guilt you. So this component of the SAD diet, why we are making a big deal of it, is at the root of so much illness, chronic disease. And when we're talking about longevity, the first tenet is don't die, right? So we have some stats on Mediterranean diet, what it does for our lifespan. We've got some information around bad oils. We have some other diets that we want to share with you, but it is really around being informed, getting the information, and then processing that for yourself and being a grown-up and an adult and having responsibility, right? Response-ability. We're not shaming, blaming, and guilting anyone into changing anything. Like that, when that comes at us, like when I teach my kids, when somebody is using that in an argument with you, they are in an inferior position and they're afraid that you're going to find out that they don't know what they're talking about, because it's just not a way. Like, that's the old system dying right there. It's not going quietly into that dark night. So I'm looking for, how do we paint the picture of what we want, right? We all want thriving. We want vitality. We want abundance. We want ease. We want grace. So here's some fun facts, right? We got fun facts of the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah, 25% increase in lifespan.
25%. That's a quarter. I mean, like, we say it like, 25%. Well, heck, that is a lot. That's a huge amount. If we're talking about 100-year lifespan, 25, that's 25 years that we're talking about there.
Yeah.
Right. From dying at 75 versus dying at 100. So with a diet change, right? That in particular, if you have prostate cancer, it increases survival rates by 48%, almost 50% with diet change, right?
Yeah. So if a patient says, hey, what can I do to double my chances of survival? Diet? Okay.
Mediterranean diet. And it's delicious, right? To boot.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, just because this is such an interesting topic with oils and fats. Like, well, wait a minute. I thought fat was bad. We can't eat it. Butter this. Like, well, guys, guess what? Our mitochondria need some good fats, right? I think soon enough, like even some of the numbers on triglycerides and all that are going to be a little more informed and change reasonably, because we know that mitochondria thrive with healthy fats, but there's some like linoleic acids, which you find in pre-made sauces. I mean, even other ones like Crisco and canola are just richer in omega-6s, which are more inflammatory, right? We want the opposite. We want omega-3s and 9s, right? We want to include, just offset the damage that we do with the SAD diet that's so rich in omega-6s that cause this constantly inflamed state, right?
Yeah, huge. We can measure these now too. We're doing these plasmalogen tests in the office through Prodrome Sciences, and we can measure, we've been able to measure omega-3, 6, and 9 in our blood samples as well. But we are looking at all of the beneficial plasmalogens, which are oils, omega-3s, 6s, and 9s. We're looking at some other longevity factors like GTAs, gastrointestinal tract acids. We mentioned this in the testing component of the podcast. So go back 2 episodes and listen to that one if that one piques your interest. But measuring, what gets measured gets changed. So we mentioned the Mediterranean diet. We kind of took our pot shots at the SAD diet, which for all intents and purposes, it's due. And then we got the Okinawan diet, right? Back to the blue zones. We talked about different areas in the world where there's a higher concentration of centenarians, people living beyond 100 years old. the traditional Okinawan diet, which this also sounds delicious. So it's vegetables and fruit heavy. So you've got your phytonutrients and antioxidant rich foods, reduced in meat. Refined grains is out, saturated fat, low sugar, salt, and full fat dairy products are all reduced or eliminated in that Okinawan diet. So, it just happens to look a lot like the Mediterranean diet for those paying attention and keeping score. So we look at that. It has very low fat intake, actually one of the lowest fat intakes of any of the diets that we have seen great evidence for clinically and in the research, which is the exact opposite of the ketogenic diet, right? Which is a high fat diet. Again, you need individualized treatment plans. So don't run out there and put these, you can put a couple of them in like the lifestyle stuff. But on a prescribed diet, you really want to be working with a physician or provider who understands that and can tailor it to your specific needs. One of the things that I like about the Okinawan diet too, there are some starches, right? I think a big complaint when people move into the healthy eating camp, they're missing the crunch, they're missing the starches, right? Those things tend to hit satiety or make us feel full. But this one's got yams, sweet potatoes, so higher, definitely starchy foods, but they're not in the white death category.
Yeah, all about the more complex carbs if they're in there, and just eating a rainbow, right? Like the orange, yellow, like all the different roots and peppers and bok choys, all of that. Just so many phytonutrients in those. Yeah, and we got to talk about some of the herbs and spices that they're consuming regularly, which in high enough doses, some of these herbs and spices are being used almost medicinally in cultures, right?
Yeah, this is something for me personally. I've got to learn how to use those spices. You, Dr. Nadal, with your Cuban heritage, have definitely you got the education on the spices, which maybe you want to share that component with us, and I'll take notes actually while you talk.
Yeah, one day you got it.
I love it. We'll do a cooking class. Maybe, if you've got enough demand out there, give us, we are soliciting feedback and questions from you all. You can send them to support@naturecuresclinic.com, support@naturecuresclinic.com. And write in there, questions for the podcast or something that you've implemented that worked for you. Like, we want to create this interactive community together. I hope that you guys are enjoying what we're bringing. We're having a fun time putting it together for you. Now, anything else on the diet that you want to share, or what are your favorite spices? I left you off the hook with that, but you've got some. I know you've got them.
Well, yeah, definitely. It depends on the season. Definitely Cuban background, but I mean, I've had fun exploring some Middle Eastern cuisine, some Italian, a little bit of everything. But, in the mornings, for instance, with my coffee, and even maybe once again throughout the day, cinnamon is great, helping to stabilize blood sugar. In many ways, it's thermogenic, just phenomenal overall. With my teas, if I'm at home, just incorporating ginger, and with cooking, so much of like Chinese and Japanese cuisine, like as a standard, it's going to have onion, garlic, ginger, and some bell pepper, and even Indian cuisine too, even more. But these are all just standard as like the base of what you're going to mix other stuff into it. Right. And you just feel the warmth and the zing. It doesn't even need to be spicy per se, but just you can feel how it's increasing circulation. It's helping to promote the digestion that's happening, increasing that stomach fire in a good way. Yeah. So there's just so many health benefits. I mean, and the greater the stomach acid, the more you can break down food and assimilate the nutrients, right? So yeah, it's a win-win, especially in a colder environment. Sometimes it's definitely nice to have some warming foods, right?
Love it. Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast recently, and it was around cooking, and they said, a lot of the top chefs say using olive oil and salt is cheating in the kitchen. I was like, oh my gosh, what would I do? What would I do? Right. So
Yeah.
I definitely need, it's kind of in my desires over this next year to increase the use of spices and having them on a day-to-day basis where we're not having to take heroic doses. We've got it built into our lifestyle. Oregano, thyme, these come into my mind. Some of those French provincial herbs that are anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory. You have the turmeric out of India. You would have to eat gobs of that though to get into therapeutic doses that we prescribe to patients. However, it is helpful to have a low level coming into the innate intelligence on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, in the last piece of this, we're going to kind of switch gears, which is a caloric restriction discussion, right? Because this actually is the most research on longevity is around caloric restriction. And we mentioned that earlier. Most species that have a longevity component to themselves have some famine. Now, we're not advocating famine, but the caloric restriction of less calories in allow us to keto adapt, moving into ketotic states of breaking down fat to produce ketones, which is a different fuel source for our body. So definitely reducing food intake and fat will decrease your weight. It will slow down the aging process. It delays the onset of most old age diseases, and it prolongs our life. So, we have studies that we're going to share with you. And then just some ways of what this works, how it's working in our body, and why you should do something like this.
Yeah. So, I mean, we know that our bodies, in a response to calorie restriction, it's going to turn on some of those certain genes that we've talked about before. And we know there's some tricks with like resveratrol and some of these supplements, but if we focus on diet and lifestyle alone, just to make sure the foundations are right, there's ways to make sure that this is happening. It augments intracellular protein quality. What the heck does that mean, right? So within our cells, our cells are mobilizing and using fats, proteins, and all these macronutrients. So if there was a way to facilitate and speed up the efficient use of different proteins, would you do it? Those are some of the main messengers in the body. We got peptides that we talked about in other episodes. Calorie restriction could do that. The other main thing that's happening is autophagy, right? That might sound similar to, well, it is. It's like auto eating, phagein, the Greek to eat, like the body's ability to eat its own waste, right? Anything that's degraded or turning over too quickly, not useful, through calorie restriction and kind of closing the door a little bit on new stuff coming in, the body can deal more efficiently with what's coming out. Simple enough to understand, right?
Yeah, that's a big one with misfolded proteins, which we're showing and educating around with prions, alpha-synuclein in Parkinson's, beta amyloid plaque in dementia and Alzheimer's. There are a lot of different misfolded proteins. So that's really, when we're looking at what kind of solutions can we do. Now, if you're low in weight or having trouble eating, this is not a method to do, especially by yourself. You want to go in with a guide, a trusted source that's monitoring you. But there's been a number of clinical trials of food restriction in healthy adults over 2 to 15 years in length, show significant reductions in body weight, blood cholesterol, blood glucose, and blood pressure. And these are all risk factors of cardiovascular disease and diabetes and stroke, which those are the number one killers of humankind right now. So it is this, again, large lever. We have Walter Longo developed the fasting mimicking diet. It's a 5-day program. We've used that with our patients. We can still use it. Things will run into and out of, like the flavors of the month. That one, our patient base got a little bit tired of the prepackaged foods. But if you've never done it, it's something to think about, because it's an easy bridge into this world of caloric restriction. That will get you down to 500 to 600 calories a day. People are definitely losing weight over 5 days. And it's nice because there's a good quality of food that is put into the box. You're definitely eating less. So I tell people that if you venture into this realm, just know, don't have your schedule packed to the hilt. Don't have all of the after work festivities or obligations. Just, downshift into a low grade, into a low gear. Take your time, go slow, drink lots of water. But this is a big one. I want people to get into action around it, because it can and it does make a difference for us. So, all right, with that one, everybody, this has been our episode of What the Health here on the Contact Talk Radio. Dr. Greg Eckel.
Dr. Jonathan Nadal.
And we will see you next week. Take care, everybody.